After tracing the origins of Lorgar's name, we have discovered that it is ancient Sumerian for cringe. Alright, Warpugs, we're going to be checking out Arbiter Ian as he explains how Primarchs got their names. Now, this is Easter eggs, so this is probably going to be historical basis and not so much of how they got their names from the actual planets that they landed on. So, with that being said, it's evident in a lot of ways where some of the Primarchs drew inspiration from Magnus with Odin. You had Gilliman with Marcus Aurelius. You had Lorgar with another emperor. You had Perturabo. Perturabo's entire legion is heavily Greek, in terms of, its inspiration. Angron is a page for Spartacus. There are several other areas that are drawn from when it comes to actually portraying some of the legions, but the names are a different matter. So, of course, you have the joke of the whole bunch, Corvus Corax, which is literally, it's the Raven Guard. The Rock, which was a nightclub nearby GW. I've heard something about how Angron actually got his name was from some bouncer or something like that. I don't know. But he's going to explain some of this. Now, I might pause afterwards just in case I know something that he doesn't mention, but we're going to go on from there. Let's kick it off. This is actually going to be entertaining, and I'm going to learn some stuff that I don't know. And I'm always in for that. Let's rock it, Warpugs. Let's go.
Hi gang, the Primarchs of Warhammer 40k are an interesting bunch. Lion, L. Johnson, Horus, Lupercal, and Angry Angron the Angry Marine couldn't be more different. But what's the inspiration behind them? Where did those names come from? And what are the mysterious origins of Raven, the Raven guy?
Let's go.
So if you didn't know, 40k, especially old 40k, is littered with Easter eggs, references often jokingly to real-world history, events, or ancient mythology. The original writers were students of history and especially art history, and those influences are everywhere in the 40k background, from obvious historical analogues to Shakespeare references. And in this, the Primarchs are no different. The names of the 18 Primarchs who led the Space Marine legions were invented over a number of years. Some were even given their names before Primarchs were part of the background, originally being generals or imperial commanders. And many of those names are actually references to something else. Sometimes these references fit with their legion.
Do I even need to mention about Jakatai Khan? Do I even need to go into that, where he draws inspiration from? No, I didn't think so.
Backstory, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes the Primarch was given the name before the background for their legion was written, and sometimes the legion's background comes from the Primarch's name, so it's a mixed bunch. So let's go through all 18, and let's start at the start with one of the more well-known stories. That
Lionel Johnson, Arthurian Legends.
Of the first Primarch, Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. Lion L. Johnson's position as commander of the Dark Angels goes all the way back to Rogue Trader, where he has a few alternate spellings, like in this box out, where he's Lynn L. Gonson, founder of the Dark Angels. But the name we know him by actually makes his origin much more obvious. Lionel Johnson was an English poet from the late 19th century. His poetry was considered very traditionalist and austere, and he was a devout Catholic convert, but he was also a gay man, something that would have been scandalous and very illegal at the time.
Really?
As such, his work often concerned...
Then it makes sense that the Lion hangs out at the Rock, because it was a gay nightclub.
And his own deep shame of the sin he felt he'd committed and needed to hide from the rest of the world.
Oh, wow.
His most famous poem, and one on exactly that theme, is called The Dark Angel. Dark angel with thine aching lust to rid the world of penitence, malicious angel, who still dost my soul such subtle violence. That's the first verse, but the poem carries on for much longer.
Wow,
I'll put a
okay.
link below. But the connection to an intensely moralistic and monastic chapter who conceal a dark and shameful secret is pretty obvious. In 40k, the Dark Angel Angels are obsessed with concealing knowledge of the Fallen, a faction of their legion that sided with Horus in the heresy, and which the chapter has spent the last 10,000 years trying to hunt down, lest anyone find out the truth. What's interesting here is that every Loyalist legion had some elements who sided with Horus. So the thing the Dark Angels flagellate themselves about isn't uniquely that shameful, especially not from the position of 10,000 years later. It's their own beliefs that cause them to be so ashamed of ever having sinned, which actually makes them a really good analogy for Lionel Johnson. Anyway, how much of that was actually intended in the Rogue Trader days is questionable, but it's one of the few where Games Workshop attempted to change the name later to try and make the reference a bit less obvious.
Yeah, but it's actually very fitting. It's actually very fitting, and it's an Easter egg that I knew nothing about, but at the same time, nobody should have to be ashamed of what they are. I'm just saying.
Apparently on the Primarch's home world of Caliban, another reference, Lionel Johnson means the Lion of the Forest, which suggests that over thousands of years of isolation, lion still means lion, but forests are called Johnsons? Okay, there's no second Primarch, so moving on, we have the third Primarch, Fulgrim, but unfortunately, he doesn't get as much of a story. In world, he's meant to be named after a mythological water deity from his home world of Chemos, but that isn't a reference to anything in real life. The best I've seen is that it's a play on words from the Latin fulgur, meaning lightning or flash, which I guess makes sense. He is quite flashy. Fulgrim is also called the Phoenician, which is an Easter egg, but not the one you think. In his backstory, he does preside over an artistic renaissance on Chemos, which I guess you could see as like a phoenix rising from the flames, but that's not actually it. The Phoenicians were an ancient civilization that existed around the Levant in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE.
They're also the people that established the Carthage colonies pretty much everywhere.
They were called that by the nearby ancient Greeks who traded with them, and one of their most valuable exports was a very specific dye that couldn't be found anywhere else.
Indigo.
A purple dye. So Fulgrim the Phoenician is actually a reference to the colour his legion's armour is. He's Fulgrim from those purple guys. Onwards, we've got the fourth Primarch, Perturabo of the Iron Warriors. Now, the obvious thing here is to go, Perturabo sounds like perturbed. Maybe he's hesitant and a bit annoyed about it, but it's a bit cleverer than that. The Iron Warriors are, of course, famed for their attrition tactics, able to withstand huge losses and just keep going. Perdurabo was the motto of the British occultist Aleister Crowley, and roughly translated in Latin means, I will endure, which...
Well, that's something I didn't know at all, and that's actually really good.
Absolutely makes sense.
Yes,
Crowley
it does.
himself was active in the early 20th century, and after studying various occult beliefs, developed his own religion, Thelema, which evolved over his life. His work was then a huge influence on many of the New Age and new religious movements that came later during the middle part of the 20th century. On the face of it, his study of magic and the occult and his obvious charisma as a sort of cult leader might have made the name a better fit for a different Primarch, but then multiple biographers of Crowley have described him as being self-confident, brash, egotistic, highly intelligent, arrogant and cruel, capable of immense physical and emotional cruelty, and showing a blind arrogance, petty fits of bile, and contempt for the abilities of his fellow men, which, that
okay, I'll take it.
That's the guy. That fits. Okay, fifth Primarch, Jagatai Khan of the White Scars. An obvious one, I think. So the Scars are an analogue to the medieval Mongols and to some degree the much earlier Huns, both civilizations of horse nomads from Central Asia, famous for descending on the rest of the world as a horde of skilled cavalry fighters, which is also exactly what the White Scars are. The most famous leader of the Mongols was Genghis Khan. Both the titles Khan and Kagan are real-world titles that are then used by the White Scars in the fiction. Genghis Khan's second son and successor was Chagatai Khan, and he was known as quite a just and lawful ruler, particularly compared to his father. And that's also how Chagatai Khan is seen in 40k. He's the leader of this horde of bikers, but he's also one of the more relatable and honourable of the Primarchs.
Yeah, couldn't really name him Genghis because that would be just a little bit touchy.
Right, Liman Russ of the Space Wolves is next. Russ is one of the early ones. Both Russ and the Wolves went through a few changes in the early fluff before...
Leman Russ, Kievan Russ. Let's do some addition. Before
they settled on this whole Norse werewolf thing they have. Originally, Russ was just a human Imperial commander, and the Space Wolves were just a regular example Marine chapter. No longboats or ancient sagas in sight. So I would guess that the whole Viking thing actually stems from the authors working with the name they already had. The Russ were an ethnic group in early medieval Europe. Prominent from the 9th to 11th century, they ruled over a state now known as Kievan Rus, which at its height covered a large part of Eastern Europe and would eventually lend its name to Russia, but they were actually descended from the Varangians, or Eastern Vikings, originally Norsemen from Sweden who'd settled along the Volga River, and that's the thread that leads them back to this guy and the whole Norse Viking theme.
Yep.
Interestingly, Space Wolf Terminator squads in 30k are called Varangir, probably a reference to the Varangian Guard, Rus mercenaries that served in the armies of Byzantium to the south. So the 7th Primarch, Rogel Dawn, has a little...
Now, so this one with Rogel, surprisingly, I do not know much about. Now, the Black Templar, on the other hand, oh yeah, I know about that. Where'd they come from? Prussia.
Less to him. He appears for the first time in Realms of Chaos during the story of the Emperor battling Horus, but there's not much else there. The best I could really find looking around wikis and things was that Dawn means stronghold in Old English and fist in Irish, so that kind of fits. There's
that
also
really
this idea that Rogel sounds a bit like regal, but that's a bit of a stretch to me.
A little bit.
But after Rogel Dawn, we get to the other really famous story, the Night Haunter Conrad Kurz
of Transylvania,
the Night Lords. So despite everyone thinking this is a Batman reference, it isn't, or at least it wasn't the original intention. Joseph Conrad was a Polish-British novelist writing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, just like the other two I mentioned, so maybe that era was someone's specific field of interest. His most famous novella is called Heart of Darkness, which tells the story of a mining company operative sent on a mission to the jungles of the Congo to track down another operative that's gone missing called Kurtz. When he finds him, Kurtz has gone mad, and it turns out he's been brutally ruling over the local people who sort of worship him as a saviour. It was adapted into the 1979 film Apocalypse Now, which moved the action to the Vietnam War and the plot to a search for a rogue US Army colonel called Kurtz. Joseph Conrad, Colonel Kurtz, and we have Conrad Kurz, a Primarch driven mad by visions and whose brutal idea of justice on his adoptive homeworld see him regarded as a feared saviour. And to really cement that, there's a few other references here.
I absolutely love this.
Planet is called Nostromo after another Joseph Conrad book, Nostromo, which also gave its name to the spaceship in the film Alien. And one of my favourite ones, in Apocalypse Now, the protagonist on the hunt for Colonel Kurtz is played by Martin Sheen. And in 40k, Conrad Kurz is eventually killed by an Imperial Kaladat assassin called Shen. Okay.
Dude. I love it. Blood Angels, Vampires and Jesus.
Number 9, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels is another pretty easy one, but it's quite interesting. Sanguis is just Latin for blood, so he's blood guy, leader of the blood guys. But also, sanguine is one of the 4 temperaments in the old medieval medical system known as humorism. Back then, a lot of doctors thought that diseases or various moods were caused by an excess of certain fluids in the body. There were 4. Too much yellow bile and you'd be choleric, that's short-tempered. Too much black bile and you'd be melancholic or lazy and sickly. Too much phlegm and you'd be phlegmatic, low-spirited. And too much blood and you'd be sanguine, Optimistic, especially in hopeless situations, which I guess is a pretty good description of Sanguinius for the entire heresy
Our glorious golden hawk boy.
story. And if you thought that was a simple one, here comes Ferrus Manus of
Iron
the Iron
Hands.
Hands, which is, of course, just Iron Hand in Latin. And he has iron hands, so he's Iron Hand with his iron hands leading the Iron Hands. He's also called the Gorgon, which is meant to be because he's grim of aspect and kind of ugly, but of course that's a reference to the homeworld of the Iron Hands, Medusa. The Gorgons are the snake-headed ladies of Greek myth, one of which was named Medusa, and of course looking at them would turn you to stone, which wasn't pleasant either. We're in the really easy middle bit of the Primarchs here.
Okay.
The 12th Primarch is Angron, who is angry and leads the World Eaters, who are also angry. I mean, I really think that's it. There's nothing else there. The 13th...
Yeah, his entire, like I said, entire storyline of Angron. If you read the story of Angron in Nuceria and read the story of Spartacus in the Ludus in Capua, they just swap some of the names, honestly. They just swap some of the names of the places and events.
13th Primarch, Rubugiaman, is an interesting one. There's loads you could go into here. The name actually features the syllables ro and man, and, you know, the Ultramarines are Roman. Guile means cunning in English and in Old French, so I guess he's like a cunning Roman man, but apparently it's none of that. It's just taken from a random name found in a French newspaper while the writer was on holiday, according to the internet anyway. And to continue, the theme Mortarian of the Death Guard is another easy one. Mors means death in Latin and is the root of loads of similar words, from the French mort to the English mortal to about half the proper nouns in 40k. So the Death Guard are just led by Deatharian.
Well, not only that, so the origin of the Death Guard, I've been able to research back and just get from cultural references and things like that where some of the legions, where they drew some of the inspirations for the legions themselves, and some of the regiments from now. I'll talk about that after this, actually. Like the Vestorian Firstborn, quite simply, literally, pulled from the pages of history, as was Deathcourt Krieg, Mordian Iron Guard, all that.
Now, Magnus the Red of the Thousand Sons is a strange one.
Odin.
Magnus means great or big in Latin. Magnus the Red is certainly big. He's meant to be a giant. But the main thing about him is that he's an extremely powerful sorcerer from planet Egypt. So I think this is mostly someone just writing a name in the book before the story had really been fleshed out. At the time his name first appeared in 40k, not much had been written about the Thousand Sons, other than that back then they wore red, something that would eventually become their heresy colours. Interestingly, planet Egypt in 40k is called Prospero, which is the name of the magician in Shakespeare's The Tempest, so there is a reference in there, it's just not one that features the Primarch. Also, while we're on the subject, Prospero's servant in The Tempest was a creature called Caliban, a sort of mutated, twisted, angry guy, and of course the Dark Angel's homeworld is called Caliban too, which is full of mutated and twisted monsters. Number 16.
So something else about Magnus. I can't remember what language it's derived from, but learned people in the esoteric were called magi. Back in the day, they were called magi. So yeah, there's that.
Horus Lupercal is next. Horus was, of course, an ancient Egyptian god. In the mythology, Horus was the son of head gods Osiris and Isis, but when Osiris is killed by his brother Set, Horus is hidden away and grows up in secret, eventually returning to battle Set for his rightful crown. It's a story familiar from lots of mythologies. Horus is particularly associated with inheritance and kingship, and, you know, getting his rightful place as the successor of his father, which is pretty apt already. Lupercal is Roman, though. The mythological founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, were said to be nursed by a she-wolf as babies. In Latin, lupus means wolf, the Lupercal is the cave in which that happened, and the Romans actually had a fertility festival called Lupercalia in honour of all that. So
kidding.
Horus Lupercal is a mix of one of the two founders of an empire and a god famous for inheriting his rightful place as ruler. Primarch 17 is Lorgar of the Word Bearer.
And like I said, in the ancient Sumerian, it means cringe.
As far as I can tell, Lorgar isn't really a direct reference to anything. The closest we can get is that it kind of sounds like the word logos, which means law or deductive reasoning. He also has a couple of other names. One is
which he didn't use.
Aurelian, because he's seen as a golden being with golden skin. But the other is the Urizen, which is a reference to the 18th century poet William Blake, who constructed a whole mythology around his poetry. In that mythology, Urizen was a creator figure, a sort of deity that represented conventional reason and law. And like Lorgar, much of William Blake's poetry had a lot of religious themes. The joke here is, of course, that while Urizen and Logos are both references to deductive reasoning, Lorgar in Warhammer is the representative of blind faith in the divine, starting from the premise that gods definitely do exist and then casting around trying to find one to worship.
Because he's an idiot.
Okay, Vulcan of the Salamanders is a relatively easy one with a lot connected to it. The Salamanders in 40k are hardy artisans with an affinity for fire and flame. In fact, that's why they're called salamanders. In various mythologies, the salamander was said to be either immune to fire or could create fire. In Roman mythology, Vulcan was the god of fire, the forge, and metalworking, whose symbol was a blacksmith's hammer, just like Vulcan in 40k. Also in 40k, the salamanders are based on the moon Prometheus, which orbits the planet of Nocturne, where Vulcan grew up, in the city of Hesiod. In Greek mythology, Prometheus was the titan who stole fire from the gods, and the first reference we have to that story in ancient writings is from the Roman poet Hesiod. In the myth, Prometheus is punished by the gods by being bound in chains and tortured. An eagle eats his liver every day, but he's immortal, so the liver regrows each night, and then the torture goes on forever. And
that's Vulcan.
The story is very similar to what happens with Vulcan himself during the Horus Heresy, chained up by the Night Haunter, tortured every day, but unable to die because he's immortal. Right, I think the last two here are just a case of the writers needing to come up with some names really fast because they are Ferrus Manus levels of silly. Corvus Corax is the Primarch of the Raven Guard. Corvus Corax is the scientific name for the common raven. And Alpharius is the Primarch of the Alpha Legion. Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, so calling the very last legion number 1 is sort of a joke. But the Black Library authors have run with this over the years. There's an in-world rumour that he was actually the first to be found, and is
no longer in-world rumour. No longer in-world rumour. Alpharius never left Terra. Alpharius never left Terra. Yeah.
Twin brother is called Omegon, which is the last letter of the Greek alphabet, but all of that is written after the fact. I would guess the reason he's called Alpharius is because someone had a deadline to hit. Anyway, there we go. 20 Primarchs named after a bunch of stuff. Sometimes careful allusions to literary history that show you just how deep the references in 40k go, and sometimes not. And to be honest, the whole of 40k is a bit like this. Part of the fun of 40k is all those historical, literary, and mythological references all mixed up together in one big pot. So there's a few more videos I could do like this. Let me know if that's something you want to see. Thanks for watching.
Well,
and if you'd like more videos about the history...
Okay, so this is the first time I've ever seen anything by Arbitor Ian. And I was not let down at all by this. The Perturaba reference was worth the price of admission in and of itself, okay? Because I had no idea. Some of these references are just great. Are absolutely wonderful. Cat. What are you doing? What is that? Timmy's in the well. Oh, God. Get down. Anyhow, the same can be said for some of the actual regiments, and of course some of the early figures in Rogue Traders, such as Sherlock Clouseau, Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau. I can't remember his full name. Then you have Sly Marble, which was a play off of Rambo and Sylvester Stallone, whose name was Sly. You have the Catachan Jungle Fighters, which are nothing more than mini Rambos, period. Deathcore Krieg influenced heavily off of German and French military uniform ideals and doctrines. The Mordian Iron Guards, very specifically, modeled after their uniforms were modeled after It looks to be late 19th century, early 20th century United States Marine Corps uniforms, and their battle tactics are literally Judge Jack on crack. It's our Arbites, Judge Dredd. Do I need to say any more? The Inquisition. Do I need to say anything more? Like quite literally, or the Ordo Malleus is called the Witch's Hammer. Do I need to say more? Some worlds set up there, Armageddon being one of them. Just on and on you could go with historical references and little Easter eggs that are hidden throughout. The Vestroyan Firstborn, like, now heavily Russian based, of course. What are some others? Elysian Drop Troopers, the Paratroopers, duh. What are some other ones that are kind of fun to look at? What do you think? You pawn me? The Felonids. Just saying. I'd love to know where the inspiration for the Harut came from. Slanesh, pick a stripper, name her Tiffany. You get it. The level of stuff in 40K that is it's just so much fun to actually go through. And I have been with this hobby for a very long time, and I never stop. You know, it's something. I've been with this hobby for this long. I make lore videos of my own, which I gotta get to. I write stories. I do all this other kind of stuff. I help other people that message me asking me about stuff. And at every single turn of the page, there's always something else that I'm learning that I didn't know before. There's always some new lore. There's always something. There's always theory crafting going on. There's always a new way to look at things. And I have really enjoyed putting some of that to my own lore videos. But yeah, there's something like this. Some of these, like, especially the line. I didn't know about the line. Did not know about Perturabo. Several of these I didn't know where they came from. So the Horus Lupercal, I of course knew where Horus was from. I knew Lupercal had something to do with Roman. Didn't quite know what else was that. Aurelian is Roman influence, but Lorgar is cringe. Anyhow, guys, I'm gonna take off from here. If you're a Word Bearers fanboy, I don't apologize. Lorgar is cringe. Past all that point, Warpugs, head down to the links in the description for Arbiter Ian's links. Go by, check him out some more. Let me know if there's more stuff like this. I always love learning about stuff about 40K that is sometimes difficult to come by. It's like some of these references. I had no idea. It's awesome. Check the description down below for my links as well, to Patreon, to my fourth wall, where I have Good Times Rivals War Crimes. I have all this other kind of stuff up there. I'm actually going to get in my brick, like I sent out for, I'm pretty much going to have a full thing of just shirts that people have sent me, Warrior Tears shirts, Fat Electrician, and my own stuff. Warpugs, thank you for checking out this. This was outstanding. Thank you for recommending it. You guys introduced me to so much cool stuff. I'll catch you guys next time. All right?